All right, well, hello. If you are joining us right now, just a little bit ago, we finished up our Conversations event where we had Pastor D.M. Gates and his wife Heather answering a lot of your questions that we've had come in over the past couple of days and live tonight, both in the room and online, about race, how we can deal with that both in our church and our community. And Pastor Gates and Heather, thank you for what we've already done tonight, what you did on Sunday. It's been really awesome getting to know you guys, and I know your heart is to help us grow in this area. And so we had a bunch of questions come in online from those of you watching we didn't have time to get to. So they graciously agreed to stick around for a few more minutes for us to ask a few more questions. So if you're joining us now, we probably still won't answer all your questions, but we've got time for a few more that you're graciously willing to answer. So just a couple of questions we didn't have a chance to get to. As I pull it up here. Okay, we talked about this a little bit tonight, but someone asked, how do you address someone who doesn't even believe that racism currently exists in America? We talked about that a little bit, but if someone comes across someone who doesn't even think this is a real problem, what would you say to, I guess, both people in that situation?
Yeah, I think I as a minority have come across that, and I think I'd said that was one of the main issues, I think, with just talking to people about race, is because if they haven't seen it, then it doesn't exist type thing. And listen, I don't think that you can force anybody to believe something. I mean, obviously, we would like everyone to believe in Christ and give their life to Him, and you can't force people to do that. I think that's also true for those who just don't think it exists. You can't force someone into that. What I would do, though, is pray to God for them to have an experience that then would awaken something in them. Because, they may have a lot of academic argument points or reasons why they don't believe it, but experiences are hard to fight when you have something that is palatable to you. Do you have anything you want to say on that?
No, that's at the point that I was going to make is I remember having a conversation with someone at work who had not experienced that themselves. And so they were challenging me on this idea of racism. And one question that I asked, have you ever walked into a job interview and worried about the people being afraid of you? And he said, of course not. And I said, that's something that the men in my family have to think about. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that you don't have to think about it and they do, that at least should beg you to ask some questions, right? So.
That's good. And a kind of similar question, but one that someone asked is, I'm going to forget the exact wording, but they asked, is intent a requirement to be labeled racist or racism? So can you be accidentally racist, or does the term racist imply that you're doing it on purpose? Like how do those things go hand in hand?
That's a tricky question, because if I say that you can do it accidentally, then it means that everyone who'd ever said that someone called them racist, they could say that it was accidental, it was just. But I believe there's a level of unknowing, because if you're a majority culture, you just don't see some things. And I think it's not necessarily that it's an intent as much it is as a blindness. I don't know if that makes sense. That I think that there's that there are some things that you don't know, that you just don't know them until you become aware of them. And I think that's what's going on right now in our society. There's a lot of people, I just use the phrase white fatigue, that are becoming aware of some things. And what we do then with what we know is important. I think God is gracious, obviously, and I think that when we're in the process of learning and maturing and developing, there's going to be some things that we're going to have, oh my goodness, I didn't know that. And then what do we do after that, to me, is the big question.
But then what would we call racism without ill intent? Like, I think we have to have a name for that. So, okay, we don't call it racism, but we need to identify it as something, or else we really can't address it. So I feel like there is some pushback on the idea that being a racist is the end-all, be-all, you're now qualified as a horrible person. But there's a thought that's put out there right now saying we've all done racist things. That doesn't mean that it was intentional, but we need to take responsibility for the things that we've done, even unintentional, because we've caused pain, right? And I think when we're trying to quibble about what it's called, it's because we're not wanting to really take responsibility because we may have caused pain, but we didn't mean to, right? And so there's just this inner battle. So I think it's not so much about what we call it, but that we're identifying the fact that because I'm the majority and because that comes with a level of privilege, I can even unintentionally step on people or take advantage of a system that that benefits me.
I think that's true too when you see the attorney questioning Jesus on who his neighbor is. You know, he's seeking to justify himself.
Yeah.
And sometimes even with the conversation, like, if I did it unintentionally, does that make me okay? You know what I mean? And I get that. I mean,
Right.
those are really good questions. Because carrying around the guilt and shame of saying, like, man, I did that, you know, but if I was unintentional, then I'm okay. Yeah, I think that was a great answer that you gave.
It doesn't work in any other relationship. You know, I've been pretty upset at my husband for things he hasn't done intentionally, but he still has to take responsibility for doing things that may hurt me or vice versa. So,
And if we take that same argument, Heather, and say, if I could have a get out of jail free card with saying I was unintentional, then in some way it also precludes me from being able to say that I'm a part of the fix, right? Because I unintentionally, so I don't really have a part to play in fixing this. And we didn't address this tonight, but I think it's a real issue that, and if I don't see myself as part of the problem, then I also don't see myself as part of the fix. Mm-hmm. And those are dangerous places to be in.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good answer.
and sorry, just
Yeah,
one last
great.
thing that I wanted to bring up. I think, though, the one thing that challenged me with this idea that I'm talking about is in any other conflict, we are compelled and we coach people to consider someone's motive, right? So if you're in conflict in your marriage, you're in conflict at work, we challenge people to have grace and give people the benefit of the doubt. But now, in this conversation around race, white people are being challenged to just take responsibility for the fact that they have benefited from a system that hurts other people. And they didn't do that always on purpose, right? So it's just, it's different than what we've been trained to do.
Yeah, well said. Questions are still rolling in, so we'll see how this goes. But one, I think there's just a curiosity that some people might have. Someone tonight brought up the question. They recently went to an African American church for the first time and really enjoyed the experience. They were probably one of the only white people there. They said that they enjoyed the music, they enjoyed the energy in the room. So they were asking, is that okay? Is it okay for a white person to go to a vast majority black church? Will they be looked at as maybe having bad motives or outsider, or is it okay for a white person to go to a predominantly black church?
Oh my
Love it.
goodness. Yeah, for sure. Definitely. But here's a couple things I would just say before you do that. One, is God calling you to be there? Right? It seems like a very obvious question. Is God calling you to be at that place? Because God's very intentional about where he plants people to produce fruit, to help be a blessing to that community. Secondly, I would say this. Don't participate in black culture for entertainment purposes. Right? Don't go because, man, they were really entertaining and I love being in the room and watching them do their thing.
Patronizing.
Yeah, exactly. I would encourage people not to do that. If you're going to any black event to go and be entertained, we're much more than entertainers. And oftentimes you see that, why can't you be more like Denzel, or why can't you be more like LeBron, or why can't you be more like Oprah, or why can't you be more, that's entertainment, and so our culture and ourselves isn't entertainment. We wouldn't want someone to come just so that they could be entertained, nor would you, as a predominantly white culture, say, I'm going to go to that white church so that I can get taken care of, or whatever, you know what I mean? Those are things that I just caution people against. Now, if you want to go, I will say that whenever you go into you're a minority now, that I would encourage you to think about your experiences and what you may encounter as being a minority now in that particular group, that people group. I say this about diversity in general, about our church and any place that's diverse, because you don't just become diverse accidentally. It's something that has to be intentional. And here's the thing that makes diversity intentional. It's sacrifice. That you cannot have people of differing views and opinions come into a room and choose to sit in the same space without everyone giving up something. And so if you're going to go into that space and you're going to be a minority, then you're going to have to give up something. And you may have to give up way more than what you thought for what you thought was a momentary excitement, right? I would test it to see if it was just, you know what, I just kind of like the taste. I like the taste of it that one time, but I don't want to eat it every day. You know what I mean?
It's a thin line, right? Because I think a lot of people might try something like that with a good intention, good heart, but they
Sure.
might accidentally cause some problems. So, yeah,
Yeah.
that's well said. Okay, we've got a couple, I'll give you a warning, a couple about white privilege and a couple about Black Lives Matter.
Okay.
So some kind of hard ones. But
Big warning.
someone on Facebook commented, I recognize that I am blessed and I'm grateful for it. When does that become white privilege? Should I feel guilty about God's blessings?
No. That's a short answer on that, right? But to acknowledge it, I think you're making progress on the fact that, man, to whom much is given, much is required. The scripture says that. So I would settle on that, and say that you don't need to carry the burden of all racism. You don't need to feel like this, I've got to fix it all, nor do I need to walk around with a deep shame or guilt. I just need to do what I'm supposed to do in any particular given situation. And at the end of the day, you're not responsible for anybody else's salvation but your own. And so those types of things are, I think sometimes they are good feelings, but we could easily we could easily put ourselves into these messianic perspectives where I've got to be I've got to be a savior, I got to fix this and that. And just acknowledging it, saying like, this is I have been born this way, I didn't choose it, but I benefited by it. Great, God's been good to me in the first place on top of that. So now what am I going to do with my life that makes sense for me to do?
It's very well said.
Good. I'll try to go back to another question here, but the Black Lives Matter, we got into this a little bit earlier this evening, but a lot of people may not even know that there is an actual organization that's kind of separate from the movement. Could you maybe just explain that a little bit more and clarify? Someone asked me, like, if you personally hear All Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, whatever, like, does that contrast from Black Lives Matter? Like, do you feel that contrast, and does that offend you? Or maybe talk about what the differences are and how are you personally experiencing that?
Yeah, okay, so I'm going to try to explain it really concise. The organization, that if you were to go to blacklivesmatter.org, I believe it is, or something like that, from my Christian perspective, I don't ascribe to them. But the statement, Black Lives Matter, to me is very real, and it's true. It's a truth. Because of what we have experienced just historically here in this country. So when someone says, and I don't necessarily think that it's always from a negative intention, but when someone says, well, Blue Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, what it says to me is, we don't give you space. We still don't give you space. You're crying and complaining, but we're not giving you space. And when I think about Black Lives Matter, the organization, I could see people with their own agendas trying to further their own agendas on the skin color of some, right? Then on the other side of it, I see people saying, well, I'm going to ignore your skin color because I don't see color. All lives matter, right? So we don't acknowledge your difference. But then there's another group that's saying we want to continue to farm out your skin color, right? We want to use that hot button issue to get our agenda moved forward, whether it's gender issues, homosexuality, whatever. But then you see it on the other end of it. You're saying like, hey, we don't want to acknowledge that you have a legitimate issue, because if we say that Black Lives Matter, then we have to own up to some things that we want to ignore.
And again, I'm always careful on this position, because even though I'm married to a black man and have biracial kids, that doesn't give me some sort of ticket to or pass. So I have to look at this from the perspective of a white person, and I think it's very important that we're owning and acknowledging that Black lives matter, because we're the ones that are helping to create equity in this space, right? And we're not just demanding that everybody is the same, but we're creating this space to acknowledge that there was years and years and years of really terrible things that have happened. And yet we want to brush by that. We don't want to address that. And I think that as a white person, it is my responsibility to stand up and look at people that don't look like me and say that you're important and you matter.
You see that in the gospel. I mean, we see that in the gospel where Jesus is, he's intent on going through Samaria.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I have to go through Samaria. Like,
Yeah.
I won't go around it like all the other all the other Jews. I'm going through this Gentile place, a place that we would rather fly over, drive by, whatever, ignore. I'm going through there, and then I'm having a conversation. I'm going to have a conversation. I'm going to sit. I'm going to listen and be heard and hear. And it transforms this woman's life, obviously. And we see what then happens. The men in the town come out and they say, we want to listen too. And we believe because you said it, but now that we've heard him ourselves, we're changed. And it's the same then Samaria that Philip goes to. It's the same. This whole idea, though, of having conversations with people. And the disciples, what would a disciple, so Jesus is like, Samaritans matter. You know what I mean? He's basically saying Samaritans matter, and I'm going to go through Samaria. And they're like, no, we don't want to go through Samaria. He's like, no, that's where I'm going. And for them to then say, well, all believers' lives matter, or whatever, you know what I mean? Or for the Gentiles to say, well, all Gentile lives matter, or, so those are very ethnically driven conversations and contexts, but sometimes when we don't have the lens for it or the perspective, we skim right through it. And we could miss some of the tension there in why there's similarities in what Jesus is doing there with the woman at the well is the same reasons that we could say that this Black life does matter.
And I guess the challenge that I would have to people that when they hear that, they kind of, maybe they have a reaction to that is, what fear is there, or what issue do you take with being able to just clearly say that Black lives matter? Right. Like really doing an evaluation and an inventory of your own heart before you're defensive or before you justify, but really saying, what do I think that costs me or takes away from me by acknowledging this?
Yeah, I think it's a question of, give space, take space, but at the same time, what concerns you most about this? Mm-hmm. It's a good way of saying it. Because anytime you say fear, then people automatically want to say, I'm not afraid of anything. But when we ask the question in a way where we say, well, what concerns you most about this? Then we hopefully can get to a place where we're getting some real life feelings from that.
And this is where I keep thinking about this equality and equity. If we all think we have the same piece, then you could be taking something from me. But we all need what we need, right? To then have the same opportunity. So, I don't know. It's just something that I've been challenging myself, that what do I think is being taken away from me if this phrase bothers me so much?
And also this phrase has been politicized too. Right. So there's that element to it too.
Has it?
Yeah, I don't know if it's been just a little bit. But so you could see where then by agreeing with the statement, whether it's a mask, so masks have been politicized. This statement's been politicized. Well, if I say this, then I'm not this. Right.
And there's a lot of assumptions made about what your belief system is.
Yeah, I'm not left or not right. And we don't really give ourselves to be an opportunity to be a shade of anything. It's all or nothing.
Very binary, yeah.
I think for a lot of us who are the majority culture, we just don't think the way that a minority person would think. So when we hear Black Lives Matter, well, of course my life matters too, right? I think it's just I think a lot of the people, they're not trying to be mean. They just have never had that perspective of being not in the majority, and so.
And
Right.
again, to be a little vulnerable, I remember years ago the first time I heard the phrase white privilege, and I was really offended by that. And I remember us getting in, the heat got raised a little in the car, and I said, well, if you want anyone to have a conversation with you about race, you don't start off by telling them how privileged they are, like their hard work didn't matter.
Right.
And it took me a while of sitting down and understanding what that meant. And then when my perspective expanded and I understood what that phrase actually meant, I could acknowledge that was true, right? And then it disarmed me. I was no longer defending myself and my position, but then I could get on board because it wasn't about me. And I think the majority sometimes struggles with that. Like, it's about me because everything is, right?
Right. And just the whole idea of we don't know what we don't know, right? Like
Sure.
if you, yeah. Anyway, I need to stop talking and let you guys talk.
Oh, it's good.
No, you're good.
So one question or one theme that's come up a couple times is the idea of like being colorblind, right? So I'd like to hear you talk about that because I've heard people say that when we talk about American culture, what we're actually saying is white American culture.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people will say, "Oh, I'm colorblind. I don't see color," but what that really does is it pushes minority cultures out of culture, right? So is it a good or a bad thing to be colorblind?
I think it's a bad thing. I mean, that's saying it to me in the very core. It's saying that I refuse to see the way God made you. And to me, it's he's got the color palette for a reason. You know what I mean? He's using color to push on our hearts, and that's only makes it only sense for it to make differing people, a human race, that we're all same inside anatomically, to then make us different on the outside like that, because he reserves the right to do that, and it's really a teaching tool. So for me to ignore it, I ignore, I think, in my perspective, I ignore the fact that God reserves the right to be creative in how he created me and you. And then for you personally, for me to say that, you know what, Matt, I don't really see you as being white. I mean, I don't know how that feels for you from majority culture, but then from black culture, it diminishes my ethnocentric feels. Like, you know, like, well, just be part of us. You know, don't be you. Be part of us. And it's a tough place to be. And I understand people's hearts behind it. So I don't say it like, okay, there they go again with that. You know, and I know when I hear people say it, they're basically espousing, I don't want you to think or perceive me as being racist. I don't, that's not the thing that's making me make decisions about you. I get that. So it's not like I don't get it, but sometimes it can come across long term as being offensive, you know.
I agree.
One thing I'm kind of curious about, we were kind of joking earlier that like we're putting you in an unfair position because you're speaking for every black person right now, which is totally not fair, right? Like no one's going to ask me how white Americans feel about anything, right?
Listen, Matt, they've given me permission. They've given me permission. All black people have given me permission for our
Last meeting, they you represented it.
right.
You can speak on our behalf.
But really, though, like, do you feel, is that unfair for us to be asking you these kind of questions? Or if I have a black friend, I legitimately want to ask them some of these questions, but is that unfair for me to do that?
I don't think so. I think it's how we're supposed to learn. There's going to be some hidden rules that you know because you weren't taught them really. They just were a part of your being, of growing up, your culture, your context. And I think the same thing has been true for me. Now, I did make mention of Brian LaRitt's book, Right Color, Wrong Culture, that just because someone has a skin color doesn't necessarily mean that they've had a cultural experiences that we would normally generalize with that skin color. So that's the challenge that you have. So you could have me, I could have been raised upper middle class, and I could have went to private schools, taken 4 vacations a year. You know, I've got a tutor. We've got several vacation homes, and I may not have had the exact same experiences as someone else who looks like me. So you could see me from the outside and say they're both black. They probably have the same experiences, and that isn't true. So I have to highlight that my experiences are maybe uniquely different because of my 17 years of law enforcement and some of the things I was able to maybe skip over because of my career, my profession. But it still doesn't skip me that if we don't have someone who's balanced enough to be able to have a conversation or create a safe place for us to have it, then where do we have them? Who do we have them with? That's important.
I think we're down to the last question we haven't gotten to yet, and it's a hard one, but a really interesting one. Let me pull it up so I get the wording right here. But basically, the idea is about lament. Let me pull it up so I get the
And
right
all
words
you
here.
have is hard questions, man.
Well,
I mean,
you volunteer for this, man. So, how would you lead people into understanding the importance of lament? So, if a white, I'm guessing what you're getting at. But if someone is in a position where they feel guilty and they hate the past that we have, the history that we have, and they're just feeling deeply
Yeah.
remorseful, how would you talk to that person?
You going for scripture?
yeah, I'm going to go for some scripture here because that's going to be the best thing for us. Here's the definition of lament as I've been talking about it. Ezekiel chapter 3 is where I kind of brought up that this is where his burden, his question, the message he had to deliver was lament, mourning, and woe, right? I got that text or that content from Ezekiel chapter 2, and that's verse 10. Ezekiel chapter 2, verse 10 is where we see that this is the content that you're supposed to deliver. And the word lament here just simply means dirge, or by beating the breast or instruments. I think in the New Testament there's a reference to this where Jesus is comparing two people who come to pray. One who prays very loud and openly so that others would hear him and see him. And then there's one who's like, I'm not even worthy to be here. You know what I mean? It's that lament. That's lament in a very, I think, practical way to see the difference between two ideas of being pride-filled versus being lamenting, or a state of lament, or an idea that, man, I see what's going on here and I realize my nakedness, I see my frailty, I see the lack of ability within myself to make progress on this particular issue, and I surrender myself. I'm open to God, whatever it is you want me to do. And the scripture, I believe, says that man went away justified. Like it's this type of this mindset or position of the heart that says that God, I'm uniquely aware. Because I've come face to face with you, I'm aware of my limitations, but I'm so grateful for your grace. I'm so grateful for your kindness, your redemption, the power there is in being in relationship with you. Because now your strengths become my strength because I'm in covenant with you. And and I exchange my weakness for your strength. Your power is made perfect in my weakness. Can you use me now in this way? Yes. To me, that's lament. If I'm explaining it from my own words, that it's not a place, it's not this, it's not depression, it's not immobilization,
Yeah.
because I'm so broken and beat down, I can't do anything, I'm a worm, a maggot. It's not that. It's really saying that, man, I've come face to face with you, Lord, and I realize that you're that good, and there's nothing good in me, but you're still going to use me. And I think that when we say that God's plan is perfectly made, it's perfectly made with our imperfections in mind, that we were going to come on board with this stuff. And so when I think about lament, I think that it's best seen as people who just come face to face with the Lord. And so if you think that when we say, I've heard it this way, then when we think about lament as the church just really needs to be in lament. Well, it almost sounds like, from my perspective, that we're saying that we just need to sit in sackcloth and ashes and just mourn and just cry for days on end. Until what? You know what I mean? Like, I think we need to have a position where we're open and vulnerable, but I don't think that we should be in some place of petrification where we're just like sitting and like everyone be quiet and look real sad and real somber. I don't ascribe to that.
So something that I thought about was, when you think about lament around this topic, around race, I can also think about that in the context of my heart is broken for the lost, right? That same level of sorrow, that your heart is broken for the condition of the world. But what is that to do for a believer? It's to motivate us. It's not to crush us. It's to spur us on to action and activity. And so if you overlay that into just being burdened and brokenhearted for the heart condition around race in our country, it should motivate us and spur us on to good works. It should spur us on to show a level of love. And that's what a broken heart does in front of an amazing God. And I think it's about turning that broken heart towards the Lord and then just being open to however he wants to use you as an instrument of reconciliation. So just, again, I know what it is sometimes to turn on the news or to look at social media, and there's just a hopelessness that comes. But I think, again, just turning that broken heart to God, there is a motivation, there's a spurring on, there's a conviction that can be birthed through that.
Yeah, that's really good. Okay, well, I think we pretty much at least touched on everything. We could keep going for days and days and days, but
Thank you.
any kind of closing remark, anything else that you think we as a church can be doing better, differently? I mean, Brent said that this was just kind of a first step. We were not going to solve anything tonight, but like, what else, any closing thoughts about what we can do better, differently as a church?
No, I think the room holds the answers. And so whoever is listening or watching now or who may ever be watching later, that I think we, as in myself, I think Pastor Brent would the same, would love to hear from you. You know, if there's something that you think would be a good next step, that this would be a great opportunity for you to chime in. Your voice is welcome in the space. What makes sense? We've got some ideas, but we wouldn't want to be just limited to our minds and what we think. But there's plenty of people who've got great ideas about what we can do as church.